To be able to publish a manga is a dream of many authors. Japan is known worldwide for its crazy work cycle and sometimes traditional view on specific topics. Being a Japanese manga author is already pretty hard. But do you know what's harder? Being a foreigner and publish a manga in Japan. That is just for the cream of the crop. We have artists and authors who got very famous there, even being foreigners, like Boichi with Dr. Stone and Sunken Rock, that is actually Korean, and Yu Kamiya with No Game No Life, who is actually Brazilian. There is a selected group of foreigners who achieved the top in Japan, and by doing so, put their countries in the otaku map. Today we'll talk about the first French author who got published in Japan, how that changed the industry, and why you should read his manga. Today, we'll talk about the great Tony Valente and his incredible manga, Radiant. Before we start with the story of this amazing manga author, I would like to remind you guys to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. It helps me a lot. Now let's get back here. Being inspired by Dragon Ball, Naruto and One Piece, Tony Valente fused everything that's followed him since he was a little kid into Radiant. Ships that fly, magical powers, and the spirit of shonen manga. While working with one of his favorite authors in France, Valente did not find joy at all. He started getting frustrated not because he disliked the job, but because he wasn't the one writing it. From that frustration that the project Radiant was born. On top of that, he and his girlfriend were expecting their child, so he felt as the image he had to pass for his kid was that everybody can achieve their dreams and actually succeed doing so. He basically didn't want to look frustrated in front of his kid. Radiant exploded from all of this. On an interview he said, "I gathered everything that has followed me since I was a kid, and things that interested me at the time I was writing it. It was the time when, in France, politics started to steer towards the right and the extreme right. When racist discourse was, let's say, facilitated. So there was an angle to explore with the witch hunt, the immigration, and etc. I gathered all of that and I made Radiant." So guys, if you don't know, Radiant talks about a lot of interesting topics, a bunch of them being related to social and political problems, focusing a lot in the concept of accepting one's differences without judgment. On the same interview he got asked, "Is there a particular reason in your life that explains your affinity for the marginalized and social outcasts?" Which he responded, "I think everyone feels like that at specific moments. For me, it's been the case because I was up on my cloud with my stories to draw, and I have happened to feel a bit separated, even though it wasn't really serious. There's also the experience of living in a city with mates from immigrant backgrounds. I'm also a son of immigrants, but you can't see it. I'm white, but it wasn't the case for most of my friends with whom I was hanging out with. With them, sometimes I could not go in stores where I used to go, we would be avoided, things that I was not experiencing when I was by myself. And I realized that it wasn't normal, and it was pissing me off. It's a thing that left a mark on me, so I put that in Radiant." We will soon talk about Radiant itself, but what you need to understand right off the bat is that Tony Valente not only wants to entertain us with his interesting and sometimes goofy manga, but he wants the readers to be more conscious about other people in general. The world is vast and shiny. Everybody can be happy together. There is no need for exclusion and prejudices. We should be as radiant as the world we envision. There were a lot of French manga before Radiant, as France is one of the countries that consumes anime and manga the most. But just Radiant was able to break the boundaries, being the first French manga ever to be published in Japan. Not only he changed his own industry in France, he started to challenge the Japanese industry, as European manga authors who are really acclaimed in Japan were basically non-existent. He delves into topics that are not covered much within the Japanese manga industry, like the care and kindness we should have with immigrants and social outcasts in general. Being different for Tony Sensei is fun, as to him it makes you more interesting, running away from the common stigmas from a society like Japan, where till this day students from some public schools cannot even dye their hair, as they aim for a very specific patterned look. And don't get me wrong guys, of course Japan is amazing, but we cannot pretend as it is the most perfect place on earth. Tony Valente understands that and tries to bring more awareness to relevant topics like these ones. Valente Sensei is a French trailblazer, and I hope many others like him appear to shake the manga industry. Thanks for your hard work, Tony Valente Sensei, and I'm excited to keep reading Radiant. Now we'll talk a little about the plot of Radiant, its characters, and its interesting power system. So let's start from the top, guys. What is Radiant about? Well, to make it simple, Radiant is a story set in a world plagued by the Nemesis, monstrous creatures that fall from the sky and destroy anything in their way. Only sorcerers can fight these creatures, but it is not normal to be a sorcerer, as to become one, you must survive an encounter with a Nemesis and gain the ability to use magic through a type of magical infection. Being infected by a Nemesis gives you access to magic, known as Fantasia, or Fantasia, or Fantasia. I really don't know how to pronounce it, but let's go with Fantasia. In this setting, you would probably say that being a sorcerer puts you in a position of prestige and heroism, but no. Sorcerers are often feared and persecuted by regular humans. We get to understand more of that prejudice as the story unfolds, but this negative image of the sorcerers was highly influenced by the Inquisition, a military organization created sometime after the appearance of the first Nemesis. They control a lot of territories, not only militarily but politically too, as in some places they replace the government and exercise its power with an iron fist, going so far as to forbid the presence of any infected person. Their negative image of the infected is still deeply rooted in the collective unconscious. The author Tony Valente really wanted to portray the Inquisition on Radiant as the Catholic Church Inquisition, mixing the folklore with this witch hunt aspect they had in Europe and the Americas. There are a lot of interesting concepts in Radiant, but before we move on to what exactly is Radiant and what some characters of the show are like, I would love to talk about my favorite concept of this series, the concept of magical energy. More precisely, the concept of Fantasia. Fantasia is an essential component for even the most basic of spells. Through the usage of magically designed tools, a wizard can learn to harness and control this energy in order to produce a desired effect or result. This can range for simply explosions, illusions, or even flight. Fantasia is noted to linger within nature itself, and as a direct consequence, there have been certain areas with a larger quantity of this energy than others. In ancient times, Fantasia was much more plentiful and filled every corner of the earth. The drove of energy was enough to allow the existence of the pixies, a species that harvested Fantasia for nourishment and growth. Sadly, with the rise of mankind, nature was commonly destroyed and turned apart to make ways for additional towns, villages, and kingdoms. That expansion resulted in a depletion of world's Fantasia quantity. It's like humans over the time lost connection to magic to fulfill their greedy needs. Innately, humans are unable to gather and manipulate this energy for their own purposes. However, upon contact with a nemesis, if a human survives, they'll gain the capacity to use special tools to produce spells. Fantasia appears to be invisible to the naked eye, and can usually only be seen when excessive quantities of it has been gathered by a sorcerer for use in a spell. Once the Fantasia has been gathered and properly focused, the caster is tasked with using the assortment of energy to carry out their will. This process is done through visualizing an ideogram, each symbol being an emblem for the type of action or command a wizard wishes to carry out. There appear to be a wide array of typical emblems that practitioners commonly use, one such being a symbol of a shield that denotes the use of a protection spell, for example. More than just being mere aesthetics, the emblems symbolize an action within the caster's mind. Repeated association with such symbols will make it much easier to produce spells. The wizard combines their will with the materialization of the symbol, and thus can produce spectacular magical phenomena. In addition to the traditional signs, sorcerers may also create their own to produce original or exclusive techniques. So basically guys, the sky is the limit. Radiant has a really fun power system, and it is always interesting to see how the characters elevate not only the power creep, but the creative level too. And talking about characters, in Radiant we have a lot of interesting ones, but I want to focus on just two, Seth and Alma. Alma is a freelance nemesis hunter and serves as both Seth's mentor and foster mother after losing all her memories. Alma is a very stern and authoritarian figure who doesn't take any nonsense from anybody. While she does have the capacity to control her emotion when needed, Alma is prone to fits of violence and isn't afraid to put that violence to use to pacify some of her misbehaving comrades. She is undeniably a very powerful sorcerer in her own right. She's been noted to know a plethora of different spells, although she seems to rely mostly on the use of her feather blade and powerful shockwaves. Beneath all the aggression, Alma is sincere and caring, especially to those she considers being her family or friend. These softer personalities nonetheless often show themselves in the form of tough love. A tough love that can be way more tough than love, as we'll talk about Seth, our main character. Constantly referred as Horned Boy because of his infection, Seth is best characterized by his stupidity and reckless nature. As a result of his sheltered upbringing, Seth is initially ignorant to basic facts of modern life. His ignorance of the world is to such a degree that on the first chapter he fails to understand what a common cow looks like, mistaking it for a nemesis and launching an attack that inevitably leads to a stampede. In addition, Seth seems to lack basic information about the world around him, even seeming to be clueless about the true nature of the Inquisition. Seth is known to be extremely immature, goofy, and childish. He finds himself tickled by even the silliest things and is even prone to poking jokes or having fun during hostile combat. I like to think that he's a mix of Natsu, Yusuke Urameshi, and Kid Son Goku. He has a strong sense of justice and tries to sympathize with most people he comes in contact with, even if they persecute him. Most of the world discriminates sorcerers, and Seth, on the other hand, tries to rationalize this hatred. He initially comes to believe that sorcerers are targeted because people relate them to the nemesis, and concludes that if he can put a stop to the nemesis descending from the skies, the animosity will fade away. Although this simple ideology of his evaporates as the story progresses and we get to see his development. Seth is a great shonen protagonist. At his core, he's an optimistic idealist that will endlessly pursue his goals. He cares little about the improbability of success so long as there is a glimmer of hope. Such is the case with his search for Radiant. Despite being told how hopeless the journey was likely to be and being informed of how many have tried and failed to do the same as he. Oh, and I just mentioned Radiant as being Seth's main objective, right? But what is Radiant exactly? Radiant is not just the name of the manga, guys. According to some rumors, the nemesis would fall from a nest of monsters called Radiant. Seth's ultimate goal is to find this nest and put end to all nemesis. Radiant's existence is still uncertain, but that won't stop our protagonist. A manga with an interesting plot, captivating characters, a refreshing power system, and an intricate mystery to be solved. This, my friends, is Radiant by Tony Valente. Read this masterpiece as it is still being published and supports the French trailblazer Tony Valente sensei. Thanks a lot for watching, leave a like and subscribe for more, keep being kind, keep believing in your dreams, embrace diversity, and of course, keep reading manga. Bye!